What India achieved at the recently concluded G20 summit at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi is being called a diplomatic coup. A consensus was reached among the G20 nations at a time when foreign policy wonks and the global media said that no consensus would be achieved. How did that happen? And what is the impact of a G20 consensus? Joining us right now is none other than the Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, who has been India's top diplomat and a well-acclaimed author. So thank you very much for joining us. One straightforward question. How was this unthinkable development really achieved?
Aditya ji, first and foremost, whenever you go into a difficult negotiation, in a multilateral setting or a plurilateral setting, one issue which you need to address up front is that there will be people amongst your negotiators or outside the negotiating field who have a vested interest in ensuring that you don't succeed. I'm not going to quantify those people here. All I can tell you is G20 is an economic platform, making allowance for the fact that political issues do cast a shadow or can cast a gloom over a good economic negotiation. But in economic negotiation, whether it's a trade negotiation, whether it's a negotiation to deal with international finance, there always will be very strong and entrenched position. India's great ability, and I give full marks to the Honorable Prime Minister, his senior advisors on this, is that India under Modi has demonstrated once again that India can and did play the role of a unifier in a deeply divided world. Deeply divided world is not just on those political paras which you may be alluding to. It's also on other issues. When it comes to climate, when it comes to trade, what used to happen earlier? Before that used to say, all right, let us apply the polluter pays principle or whatever it's called. And we must have common but differentiated response. Yes. So we'll say no. The damage to the global system, to the earth, to the atmosphere has been caused by countries XYZ. They must pay for it. And that my per capita emissions are much lower than. By all that is true. But at the end of the day, what is the kind of world you want to bequeath to your next generation? I think whether it was the COP meeting in Paris, whether it was the changing of the Indian position when the Prime Minister was on a flight from somewhere to Glasgow, he overrode the advice of his civil servants and he said, no, India is now going to walk the talk. It's that spirit. India, the unifier in a deeply divided world. And by the way, Aditya, I never had any doubts that we'll get a conclusion. Why? Tell you very frankly. If you have the capacity to produce a cultural extravaganza and do meetings in 60 cities, 220 meetings or whatever, people will know that you have a sincerity and of purpose. If you are able to bring top professionals down to the discussion at the basic draft level, people know you're serious. If you have a turnout of the kind we had, why would world leaders not want a shot in the arm for the multilateral system or a good message going to the other plurilateral organization? Once that was clear, I was very clear we would get an outcome. But I didn't think we'll get such a good outcome. I thought, look, when you have a contentious issue, it means there are divided this thing. Then you give some, I give some, there's a trade-off. But today you can draw satisfaction from the fact that the Chinese have drawn satisfaction from it. The Latin American presidents, Argentina and Brazil have welcomed it. Western Europe is welcoming it. Just about everybody I know has welcomed it. Not just the governments. Bill Gates has warmly welcomed it. Your film stars are welcoming it. So as they say, success has many fathers, but this is not fathers. Nobody's wanting the paternity of this because they know where the paternity lies.
Right.
Here what they're doing is expressing satisfaction at a job well done. And for this, the full credit must go to the Prime Minister and his team because they were resolute, absolutely focused. And I had no doubt that they will pull it off.
Another thought that comes to my mind on the sidelines of this G20, one of the first bilaterals that happened was between Prime Minister Modi and Biden. And in the 29-point joint statement that was issued, one significant point that we have debated for years together is about the UNSC reform, is about US's support to India for India's permanent inclusion in the Security Council. I'm sure while you represented India very resolutely at the UN, that debate also happened at that time. Where are we on the UNSC reforms?
Look, I'll tell you,
what is India's position?
I'll tell you first of all, the number of countries that openly support India's permanent membership in a reformed Security Council, all right? I'm being very careful with words, permanent as in permanent, permanent with or without, I'm not getting into that, with or without a veto, all that. Look, I say with a sense of modesty as an Indian, as a rebel, the Security Council needs India now. The Security Council as the premier designated agency which is authorized, it's the only one authorized to make a determination on whether there's a threat to international peace and security. You can't get up from your bed one morning and say, I think there's a threat, I'm going to bomb so-and-so. The internationally designated agency is the Security Council. If you think that there is a threat to peace and security, go to the Security Council. And the Security Council will make the determination. And then the Security Council will authorize you to take all necessary measures, which is an euphemism for the use of force. Security Council has been paralyzed. It's been paralyzed for several years now. I think the last resolutions we got out of the Security Council, if I remember correctly, on war and peace were 1973, if that's my figure is correct. On Libya, on Syria, the Security Council was paralyzed again. And on Ukraine and all these issues, the Security Council has been paralyzed. It's non-functional to that extent. A lot of wars are taking place in the world. Just draw up a list. How many of them have people even bothered to go to the Security Council, let alone get Security Council authorization? India's case for permanent membership, the credentials have never been in any doubt. But under Modi, the last 9 years, the Modi government has demonstrated a higher and a more focused capacity for heavy lifting. So whether I'm not giving you the softer ones, like war takes place in Ukraine, 28,000 Indian students are brought out, not only Indian students, but students from other countries, including the developed countries. Earthquake takes place in Turkey, the Prime Minister is in Bengaluru, he makes one phone call, Indian relief assistance is on the way. Today, by bringing about the successful conclusion, you've also demonstrated you're not just a southern power. See, Africa's admission, global south is all, but today you're behaving and lifting by accepted global standards. I mean, you have an economy which is on its way to becoming one of the 3 large economies in the world. Your contribution as a peacekeeping nation is amongst the top. You are now a major contributor to all the sectoral discussions within the UN and the system. Well, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little listing. You draw up a list of the CEOs of the major US corporations, where 27, 28 are headed by either people of Indian origin or Indian citizens. India has arrived. That civilizational capacity, and this is what the Prime Minister succeeded, of adopting a humanitarian, human-centric approach in the post-COVID era for the initiation of a new world order with India at the center. That's India. And that, I think, is the overriding message which will resonate from this G20.
Minister Puri, trade is essential for better economics and better economy. Similarly, connectivity is essential for better trade and smooth connectivity. So I want to ask you about another surprise that was thrown on the sidelines of the G20 between Europe, US, Middle East and India, a connectivity project. How would this impact strategically looking at India, the connectivity paradigm? And also, do you also think that this is as a counter to BRI or a setback to China?
Aditya ji, I would not use the word counter, because counter to wo hota hai, something is very successful and somebody is trying to compete. That thing has turned out to be a debt trap. Wherever project finance has been given, countries around India, I mean, I don't know, I was surprised the young leader of the Congress party he was extolling the virtues of this initiative. He doesn't realize that Indian territory was ceded by another country and that project runs through Indian territory. What is ours? And he's praising it. But usko chhodiye. Main issue is that this Belt and Road Initiative, I think, has run its team, and that is becoming pretty clear from those who got project finance and those who could not meet their obligations for repayment and now having to cede their territory. This is something totally different. So one is not a counter to the other. This is a more economically viable scheme which will produce connectivity through sub-components, segments added from one to the other to the other. Now, if you can get an agreement between the ports in India and the Middle East, not only will you be facilitating the existing trade, but you will be augmenting the trade. And then if you get the stuff to India, you will get it through the shipping lanes to other parts of Asia. So it's Asia, Middle East, Europe, and on the United States. So I would say ports, seamless road travel, railway connectivity, telecommunication, fiber optic, I mean, the whole thing will start spanning out now. Is there capital available for such schemes? My submission to you is yes, and in plenty. Because this will be the perspective plan, the future shape of what this part of the world will look like in the coming times.
Another agenda that has been on top of PM's agenda is climate change. And we had a consensus on that as well, even though there wasn't really a commitment on limiting fossil fuels. Where are we on the reduction?
See, fossil fuels, you've hit a very... Everybody is committed to reducing fossil fuel. Everybody is committed to net zero. But you don't want to make commitments which turn out to be unrealistic. In order to transition from the current fossil fuel world to the green world, you have to survive the present. And I think the beauty here is that the transitioning, the Global Biofuels Alliance, I mean, I say with a degree of confidence, it's not that $100 billion or $200 billion you're looking at in say 5-10 years. The gas people tell me, the biogas people tell me it's $500 billion. Now I think if you are able to leverage all of it, including a massive augmentation in second generation technology, making ethanol from bamboo shoots from agricultural waste, you're looking at $1 trillion opportunity. But I think the evidence is already there. I mean, you look at the shares of the biofuel companies in India, suddenly one day they woke up with a smile on their faces in the morning. But that's going to happen globally. I spoke to the head of Unica, the Brazilian cooperative which deals with ethanol. They're very, very excited about this. Talk to the Grain Council in the United States. Talk to anybody. I I tweeted a thank you for my Brazilian colleague and the UN's Secretary of Energy. She tweeted back saying delighted and saying that this is the deal we struck with Minister Puri in Goa. But it's much better for us to do it at the level of heads of state and government. It gets much more. So whether it's the economic corridor, whether it's the Global Biofuels Alliance, all of this has actually added to, and this is the important thing, added to the resonance of the G20, because this is G20 plus.
Where do you think is energy security in government's agenda, and what are we really looking at? And finally, under the banner of energy security, renewable energy, what are we doing on that?
Aditya, energy security is now a fundamental prerequisite for any government's planning. Because you saw what happened in a country in South Asia, around India. I mean, if you don't have energy, you have social and economic turmoil. So you have no option but to ensure energy security. But energy security in a developing country, in a fast-growing economy like India, takes on other dimensions. It is both availability and affordability. And I think we were able to ensure both. Globally, fuel prices, petrol and diesel prices in the last two reference years, 21 to 23, say July, August, 2 years comparison, went up by 40%, some place 80% in another place. India, they came down, petrol prices came down by 5%. Why? Successful management, government reducing its, central government reducing its excise duty and state governments reducing their VAT. Diesel prices also came down by 0.2%, whereas in the world route they are shooting up. Now, let me say that you also, in addition to availability and affordability, you also have to do the transition. So I call it sustainability. And this Biofuels Alliance is a classic case in point. I think after we are through with our short-term plans on compressed biogas, SATAT plants, you will just see that biogas will be a very important component of our alliance.
At the G20, we also had this huge document, so we have a consensus on a lot of issues on empowering women.
There's another additional page and a half I saw there, and bringing in things like digital, etc. Fantastic, fantastic.
So on empowering women, I want to ask you, sir, that there are still challenges. Even though empowering women working group has been established under India's presidency, that will be taken forward by Brazil, but there are still challenges, not just in India, globally, on political representation, on healthcare, on education. Prime Minister has worked a lot. We had a lot of reforms, a lot of additional schemes by the government of India. What are we looking at in the coming years?
Look, this is not so much an Indian problem. This is a global problem. And I think these texts on gender or women's empowerment, I was very impressed with it. I'll tell you why. Why is it not an Indian problem? India, we already have the measures in place. Every scheme of the Honorable Prime Minister has women at the center. Shauchalaya banana. If you make 11 crore toilets, whom does it help? It helps the dignity of the girl child. Women don't have to go to defecate out in the open. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Malikana Haq in the name of the lady of the house. Okay, Ujwala scheme, freeing them from the toxic kitchen fumes from kerosene, wet wood, coal, etc. But there are countries in the world where these basic things have not taken off. That's one. Secondly, I don't know, I may be an exaggeration talking to Lakshmi, but she's a staunch champion. She said, unless these things are done, women's empowerment in several of those countries, this whole gender agenda will be hit back by not, they use very much, decades. They talks about hundreds of years, etc. Because it's not taking off in some places. I mean, you've got, I'm not talking about patriarchal societies, I'm not talking about that. But somehow the realization that gender sensitive development, I mean, I told you all of the Prime Minister's schemes have women at the heart of it. So I think all that I saw in that declaration, there are many takeaways for implementation. I congratulate the G20. That's all I can say. By the way, I was PR in New York when UN Women was established. And the head of it was a very famous politician, I will not name. He realized that he's not cutting ice, so he said, I'm going on leave and Ambassador Puri will be chairing it. It was under my chairmanship that this UN Women entity was born. And when our previous government, when our Minister of State then, Praneeth Kaur, visited there, they gave her pride of place to preside over the General Assembly during one of the sessions because India had played a role in its establishment. So India has always been right up front, and the Prime Minister particularly, he's been very sensitive. I mean, triple talaq, I mean, there's an act of courage. And more than that, I think the government of Assam is now going into taking action against polygamy, etc. I mean, these are very child marriages, all these, unless you do these things, you're going to be driven in the other direction.
Well, under Prime Minister's leadership and under your leadership, we have a new parliament. And of course, we are about to enter the new parliament. We'll have sessions there. But we also look at India as this largest democracy, as
mother of democracy
and the oldest democracy. Are our rich traditions, testimony to the fact that this democracy is thousands of years old? And what comes to your mind when you see this new parliament?
I'm a student of history, and I can tell you, we had republics in the east of India and Vaishali, God knows how many years ago. I mean, if you look at the Indus Valley civilization, which you tried at 2,500 years ago or whatever, you had sabhas there. So democracy has been in evidence, republics in Indian civilization. What the beauty about the Indian civilization is, and I said this to the Honorable Prime Minister one, I said all the old civilizations, Chinese, Euphrates, the Egyptian civilization, Indian, but Indian is the only civilization which can have something like Varanasi, a 1,000-year-old city, being converted into a modern smart city. Because the two coexist. I mean, here you are at the tipping, the cutting edge of technology. You're landing on the moon, you are all over the moon now, you've got a lunar mission, you're doing all those things, and yet you have basic grassroots level developmental challenges in the agricultural sector, in your urban local bodies, etc. But that's the beauty of India. And I think the new parliament, of course, it's already been unveiled, but when you all get a closer, continued free run of it, hopefully in a few days' time, you'll see how it has brought together absolutely cutting-edge modern technology, all right, with a complete back to the Indian Renaissance, the Indian culture, the civilizational thing. I mean, some of the stuff, even in the Bharat Mandapam, I don't know how much whether you got a chance. I mean, I've been more associated with its construction, etc., with the final version, etc. Parliament, these are really a great tribute to India.
You're merely saying that, it's not about a structure, it's not merely about a building, but it's about the democratic values. And perhaps you're looking at the next 100 to 150 years when actually you constructed this building?
Aditya, I'll tell you something. As Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, I looked at it more closely. Of course, I was a student of modern Indian history also. I think the thinking started around 1916 for this entire architectural complex. And what did they do? Around 22, I think they started building it, and in 27 they completed it. They never thought this would be the legislature, the parliament of an independent India. Independent India was not on the horizon for them then. I mean, independent India was something they were reluctant to come to terms with even many decades later. It was supposed to be the imperial legislature, okay? But for some reason, after we became an independent country in 1947, we didn't attend to these things. Along comes Mr. Modi in 2014. He's already applied his mind. And then when I became minister in 2017, I started receiving these big manila folder, this big thing with, and I opened them, and they're the chancelleries, the parliaments of all over the world. Australia, Brazil, Washington, D.C., big size photographs. Somebody was studying them. I just still don't know who was studying them. But then we made an announcement in 2019, and then record time. In 2 years, you built all this. So there has been a tremendous effort, led hands-on upfront by the Honorable Prime Minister, but all the other team members, etc. They have, not only played ball, but in a very efficient way.
So one final question before I let you go, your busy day ahead, is about Justin Trudeau, is about Justin Trudeau's visit also for the G20, and Prime Minister did some tough talking on a polar side, not a bilateral. But on the exact moment when Prime Minister was meeting him, there was again a Khalistani propaganda event happening in Canada. And this time, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu goes on to threaten the Prime Minister and the Home Minister and the other ministers. How do you react to that?
I'll tell you something. I will not answer your question directly, but I'll answer it in a way you'll understand exactly what I mean.
Sure.
I was accredited to the Court of St. James. I was Deputy High Commissioner in London. For long periods of time, I was also acting High Commissioner in between. We saw the beginnings of this kind of problem then. I once went to the Foreign Office, and I remember the name of my interlocutor, a very senior diplomat now, retired but very eminent. And I told him, look, my friend, you take great pride in your democratic freedoms and the freedoms that you allow your citizens and everyone to enjoy, which is commendable. But please note that you have a comfort level, because that comfort level makes you believe, and I told him this is only illusory, it makes you believe that this is somebody else's problem. That guy is using this kind of incendiary language because the problem will take place somewhere else. So a very mature diplomat, he says, I know you are taking exception to these fringe groups from India and they're doing, but we have freedom of speech. I said, listen to me, forget about freedom of speech. You are encouraging something which you will have to pay the price. And believe me, this was before 9/11, and then bloody 9/11 took place. I remember 9/11, I had my daughter in that building. And yesterday when we were reminded, and she said, no, I was very lucky. I said, no, you were very brave. She said, no, it's the firefighters who were brave, but they all ran and so on. But let me tell you, if you think you can play democratic politics on the basis of somebody else's security, you're mistaken. We've already had incidents with that country on airplanes and so on. I'm not going to go into that. But look, today, all the other mature countries have understood that. The UK has understood that. The Americans have understood that. For anybody coming around threatening our people, I mean, that's what world do they live in? I have a very simple thing. You get the blessings of 150 crore Indians, no matter where you are, you'll benefit by those blessings. But on the other hand, if you try to undermine the sanctity and territorial unity and integrity of those 140 crore believers, you'll end up with something else. So I don't know. I don't want to comment on that gentleman himself. But people threatening us, I mean, what the hell? They against Mother India? I mean, this one of these people you are talking about, I've had some experiences when I was in New York. So it's all very easy to draw your monthly paycheck from a neighboring country to India and then talk big. But things catch up. Things catch up, as they will, I'm sure.
Well, Minister Puri, nonetheless, congratulations for the G20 success and thank you very much.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you. All the best. Thank you.